Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
If Theresa May didn't have enough to worry about, she's now got another couple of problems on her plate, both of them caused by members of her cabinet. The Development Secretary, Priti Patel, has caused her huge embarrassment by holding talks in Israel with senior government figures while she was on a private family holiday without telling the Foreign Office in advance. And the Foreign Secretary himself, Boris Johnson, has made unguarded comments about a British woman who's being held in jail in Iran that might mean her being imprisoned even longer. Let's talk to Norman, who is with us. Hi, Norman.
Hi.
So, in normal circumstances, would these two ministers have lost their jobs by now?
I think a lot of people at Westminster think, yes, they would have been sacked, but because Mrs May's cabinet is just so fragile at the moment, she can't afford to boot anyone out. But it is a fairly extraordinary set of events that is now unfolding. Normally on Tuesday there's a cabinet. There isn't a cabinet today, and frankly that's probably just as well, because you suspect a lot of cabinet ministers would sort of be looking rather shamefaced at the mess they're in. Top of the pile, Boris Johnson, as you say, facing mounting criticism after he appears to have worsened the plight of this British Iranian woman who's already been jailed for 5 years by mistakenly suggesting that she had gone to Iran to help teach journalism. Now, the Iranian authorities have said, aha, she was here to spread propaganda against our regime, and are now threatening to double her jail sentence. And this all stems from comments Mr Johnson made last week at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Let's just have a listen to what he actually said.
When you look at what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing, it's just, you know, she was simply teaching people journalism, as I understand.
Now, her husband has said that is just simply incorrect. Her employers have said that's just wrong. So far, we have not had an apology or clarification from Mr Johnson, although he is going to phone the Iranian foreign minister later this morning. Elsewhere, of course, we have Priti Patel, who has been found out basically being a little bit economical with the actuality, shall we say, about going and seeing a whole load of Israeli politicians during a holiday in Israel, not telling the foreign secretary or anyone in government about it, and not being very clear about who she was meeting, including, it seems, the Israeli Prime Minister. Then, of course, at the table we would have had Damien Green. He's a bit shamefaced because he's under investigation by the Cabinet Office over improper behaviour, alleged improper behaviour, and whether he had pornography on his computer. We've got the new Chief Whip, Gavin Williamson, who's just been promoted, and a lot of people think he's only been promoted because he's Theresa May's best buddy. And then Andrea Leadsom is facing accusations that she was the woman who knifed Michael Fallon by saying Mr Fallon had sort of made improper remarks to her. I mean, my thinking is Theresa May is probably going, phew, thank God I don't have a cabinet meeting today.
Thank you very much, Norman. Right, let's talk to the Conservative MP, Nadhim Zahawi. He sits on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and in a moment we will speak to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband, Richard Ratcliffe, and political commentator Daisy McAndrew. Nadhim Zahawi, good morning. Should Boris Johnson resign?
No, I don't think he should resign. I think the important thing is to focus on Nazanin. This is a mother, a wife who was on holiday and has been jailed, and the Iranian regime a couple of weeks ago were arbitrarily looking at increasing her sentence. Let's not forget what this is all about.
The thing is,
rather than playing politics with this,
just
this
a minute.
is all about
no one is
Nazanin.
No one is forgetting the precarious position that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe finds herself in, apart from, it seems, the Foreign Secretary.
Well, I don't think that's right. He's already on that committee said that he would personally want to visit Nazanin. He will, I'm sure, be redoubling his efforts when he speaks to the Iranian foreign minister today.
He got his facts wrong in a
make sure that we get Nazanin back.
He got his facts wrong in a way that he absolutely should not have got his facts wrong, because somebody's life is depending on the kind of comments that the Foreign Secretary of this country makes?
Well, Nazanin's life is depending on the behaviour of the Iranian the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and I think let's be careful here. We've got to make sure that we get Nazanin out. She's a British citizen, a mother and a wife. She was on holiday, and we
so
need to make sure we get her out.
Boris Johnson makes mistakes about why she was in the country, he's not going to be able to get her out, is he?
And he's going to be on the phone making it very clear to his counterpart in Iran that his words to the committee were wrong, and he will redouble his effort to get her out. And look,
has he rung his Iranian
counterpart already? The way the Labour Party are behaving.
Has he rung his Iranian counterpart already?
Well, I don't know because I don't speak for Boris Johnson. I'm a member of Parliament and on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I want him to redouble his efforts. What I don't want to happen is for Emily Thornberry and the Labour Party to be seen as stooges for the IRGC or Qasem Soleimani.
Oh, come
this is
on.
very, very wrong. We should focus on the behaviour of the Iranian regime and put as much pressure on them as possible to get Nazanin back home.
The way you are talking, it sounds as though you don't really think Boris Johnson has done anything wrong.
That is not true, Victoria. With all respect, I opened by saying to you, he clearly made a mistake, and he has quite rightly
how damaging is that?
wants to put this right by speaking to his counterpart. What is damaging is the behaviour of the Iranian regime and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command. That is what we should focus on.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Nadeem Zaghari, Conservative MP who sits on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Richard Ratcliffe is here, as is political commentator Daisy McAndrew. Hello. How are you?
Hi, Victoria. Yes, yeah, it's been a tough few days.
So, how damaging is it, what Boris Johnson said? And just to let our audience know, he told a parliamentary committee that your wife was in Iran teaching people journalism, a reference to her role as programme coordinator with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Days later, which is not true, she's not teaching people journalism. Days later, a court hearing in Tehran cited Mr Johnson's comments as proof she was spreading propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, so that's exactly right. He spoke in the Foreign Affairs Committee and he said three things, one of which was as the MPs just said, he condemned Iran for its arbitrary detention of her, so I was pleased with that. He said she was just training journalism, which we weren't happy with, and he offered to visit, which we were also pleased with. So at the time it was, all great, and we picked up on the positives. And then, yeah, 2 days later she was brought in front of Judge Salavati, who's the most severe of the Revolutionary Court judges, and told there were new charges of spreading propaganda against the regime.
Which could potentially lead to her spending more years in jail.
Which could, it depends on how many years they sentence her for, but yeah, it carries a double sentence because she's now being classed as a repeat offender. We'll see where it goes.
What do you want from Boris Johnson?
Well, I mean, he made a statement to Parliament, and we say things sometimes that we don't quite get right, and I've said them in interviews as well. But he can, in Parliament, correct it. And I think the important thing, rather than a private phone call to the Foreign Minister, is in Parliament to say, listen, Nazanin is innocent, she is a mother on holiday, and she wasn't training journalists. That's then clear, it's clear to the Iranians, and it can't be manipulated in the way that the Iranian press have been doing since.
Are you comfortable to see him stay in his job?
It's not my place to tell what should happen with the Foreign Secretary, and candidly...
Is he good enough to be Foreign Secretary?
I've only got interest in one foreign policy issue at all, which is Nazanin's... I mean, I'm no judge on anything else. I am glad that he engaged with Nazanin's case last week. I'm glad that he condemned Iran. I wouldn't want him to back away. I want him to continue to do what he can to get her home.
Daisy McAndrew, hello.
Good morning.
What do you think as a political commentator?
It's an absolute disaster. I mean, Boris's buffoonery is only one element of what's going on in Westminster, but obviously it's the one element that has a huge impact on your family. And the fact that he hasn't yet publicly changed that statement, I find absolutely extraordinary. So he said, I'm going to call the Iranians, but hasn't come out and said, I got it absolutely categorically wrong, and actually she wasn't there training journalists. We know he's got a massive track record of buffoonish comments and lack of detail, but normally in the past it's been hanging off a zip wire, hasn't really affected anyone, it's all been a bit of a laugh. This is not a laugh, this is very, very serious, and this is one of the reasons why people were very worried when he got this position, because his knowledge of detail or ability to remember detail sometimes has failed him in the past and is doing so again.
As Foreign Secretary, can you be across every single bit of detail?
No, not every single bit, but this is not a small detail. This is a huge story that's been running for a very long time, with an innocent woman being held in Iran. This is something that he should have had at the very top of his mind and known exactly how dangerous it would be if he got it wrong, which he did. And he's one of many cabinet ministers making an absolute hash of the job at the moment.
How is your wife at the moment?
Yeah, very, very shaken on Saturday when she just came out of the court. And of course, there's as much what happened and then the memories of all the previous times and being back in solitary. I spoke to her on Sunday, she was a bit calmer. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, this is sort of a disorientation and a fear for what this will mean. But, yeah, I promise her that, we'll keep going.
Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you very much. Thank you.
First of all today, let's look at the trouble piling up for Theresa May as threats to her government emerge from all directions. The Prime Minister had to remind International Development Secretary Priti Patel of the ministerial code yesterday, after it was revealed that Ms Patel held secret meetings with Israeli officials, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, without the Prime Minister's knowledge. Boris Johnson's latest verbal blunder has been used by the Iranian authorities to justify potentially doubling a British woman's prison sentence. And Theresa May's de facto deputy, Damien Green, has denied allegations he had extreme pornography on an office computer in 2008. The Cabinet Office is investigating. To add to the Prime Minister's woes, things aren't much better in the Commons. The Speaker has set the government a deadline of tonight to publish the Brexit impact assessments, a series of 58 official reports on the impact of Brexit on Britain's economy, which the government had sought to keep secret. Amid mounting sexual harassment claims, Commons leader Andrea Leadsom is now under fire after being accused of failing to act on a rape allegation by a Tory aide. Last night, the Prime Minister announced an independent grievance procedure for MP staff. If all parties agree, that should be in place by next year. Well, we're joined here now by the journalists Isabel Oakeshott and Lucy Fisher of The Times. Welcome to both of you. Isabel Oakeshott, first of all, let's start with the International Development Secretary, Priti Patel. How much trouble is she in?
Well, I think what she's done is extraordinarily serious. Not only has she been carrying out a kind of parallel foreign diplomacy operation as the International Development Secretary, but she has also been less than truthful with her account of what happened. She finally admitted that the Foreign Office didn't know before she went off on her holiday that she was going to have multiple meetings with Israeli officials. She was less than truthful about how many of those meetings took place, and all of this had to be kind of whittled out of her. I think her position is extremely tenuous at the moment. The Foreign Secretary has obviously been, put in a difficult position by this. It's all very awkward, but she is at the moment being saved by the fact that Theresa May has so many other crises going on at the same time.
I mean, is it enough, having listened to what Isabel has just said, is it enough to remind the International Development Secretary of the ministerial code? You would have thought that would have been blindingly obvious in terms of a conflict of interest while going on holiday to Israel, having up to 12 meetings, including with the Prime Minister, that no one, it seems, knew about ahead of time. Should she really resign or be sacked?
Well, I think there's certainly going to be more pressure on her to do that today. I mean, it's just an enormous humiliation, isn't it, for the Prime Minister, not least because she met the Israeli Prime Minister last week and didn't know until Friday that one of her own ministers had been conducting these secret meetings with him over the summer. But yeah, I think there are questions about the ministerial code. If it can't be shown, said to be the case that Priti Patel broke it by going abroad and having these meetings, and yet there's an MP, Mark Garnier, who's been accused of breaking it over asking his secretary to buy sex toys when he was only a backbench MP. I think there are questions about whether the code is fit for purpose.
Right, and at the moment she is still in post. So let's talk about the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, and his comments that he has made in recent days, because he claims that actually humour is important in diplomacy, but actually this is deadly serious because it is concerning a British citizen who is at the moment in jail in Iran, accused of spreading propaganda. I mean, what impact have the comments that the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson made?
I think this is a case for a complete collective sense of humour failure on the part of all voters, who should be appalled that the Foreign Secretary had such a poor grasp cusp of detail that he made casual comments which suggested that this poor woman who has been incarcerated in Iran on an extremely flimsy basis, he suggested that she had actually been training journalists while she was out in Iran. That is not the case. That is not what she and her family have argued. It is not what her employers have argued. And it has now raised the prospect that she will have her sentence doubled. It is a travesty that this woman is in jail in the first place. I find it extraordinary there hasn't been more fuss about this. The case has been in the media off and on, but really, when you look at the details, as I have some time ago, I thought it was incredible, actually, that the government wasn't making far more of a song and a dance of it. And now the Foreign Secretary has made her position worse.
Right, he is going to be standing up in Parliament in a few hours' time, Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, and he has already said that he doesn't want his comments to a Commons committee to provide any justifiable basis for further legal action against Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. And he accepts that he could have been clearer when he made those comments about her teaching journalism in the Foreign Affairs Committee. Is that going to be enough?
No, I don't think so. The woman's husband has come out today and made it very clear that he needs to retract the comments. Labour have called for him to resign and again to retract the comments. And we also know that there are Conservative MPs who so far have stayed back, haven't gone public in asking him to retract the comments and quit if he's not willing to do so. But I think that could be the case later today. I think so far people have been concerned that this case could turn into more of a political football. They don't want to put this woman at any more risk. We know that she's been on hunger strike, that she is suicidal. But so far, Boris's sort of comments saying that he could have been clearer and that, you know, even what he said wasn't a basis for the Iranian judiciary to hold it against the woman is not good enough.
What does this say about the state of Theresa May's government and her leadership?
Well, you asked earlier whether chimpanzees might be able to make better politicians than the bunch we've got at the moment. I mean, what an absolute shower. I've virtually never seen anything like what we are witnessing at the moment. We have multiple scandals going on, some more serious than others, but all in parallel at the same time as this government ought to be completely focused on its main task of the day, which is delivering Brexit, which is quite enough to be getting on with without these cock-ups left, right and centre.
I mean, is it now impossible for Theresa May to sack leading members of her cabinet because of the fragile situation that the government finds itself in? Because it's a minority government, because Michael Fallon, the former Defence Secretary, resigned and stood down, and one of her other closest allies is now being investigated. Is that the reason?
I think that probably is the reason. If she can't sack Priti Patel over her actions over the summer and Boris Johnson over this extremely serious gaffe, it's difficult to see in what other position she, you know, what else it would take for her to actually finally move. But as well as one of her key lieutenants, Sir Michael Fallon, having to quit the cabinet last week, Damien Green, the de facto Deputy Prime Minister, being investigated. I think next on the sleaze allegations, there are also going to be questions for Gavin Williamson to answer about what he knew while he was Chief Whip. So I think that there's still more problems yet to come for her.
Well, and then finally on that, Isabel Oakeshott, yesterday's announcement of an independent grievance procedure for MP staff, is that going to be sufficient to deal with this behaviour?
I think it's enough for now. It's very difficult to regulate what is an extremely complex area, and many of the allegations that we've seen haven't actually concerned the relationship between MPs and their staff. They've been about MPs' interaction with journalists and so on. So I think it's a good start, and we have to see how it evolves as to whether anything further is necessary.
Well, thank you both very much.
The Foreign Secretary faced calls to apologise and even resign this afternoon over comments he's made about a British woman, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's being held in Iran. She was arrested last year for supposedly being part of a coup plot. Mr Johnson told MPs last week that she was there to train journalists, but her family insists she was on a family visit. They say the Foreign Secretary's comments could add years to her prison sentence. This afternoon, Mr Johnson said he was sorry if his remarks had been misconstrued. Lucy Manning reports.
She has been held for 584 days, separated from her daughter Gabriella and her husband. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe from North London is Iranian and British. Imprisoned by Iran, and now her case seemingly undermined by the British Foreign Secretary. Boris Johnson's comments to MPs last week suggested she was in Iran training journalists before her arrest.
When you look at what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing, it's just, you know, she was simply teaching people journalism, as I understand it.
Her family always clear the Thomson Reuters Foundation employee was just visiting relatives with her young daughter.
I don't think it was helpful. I think it was a mistake, and I think, you know, it's a mistake that needs to be corrected. She was in a very bad way on Saturday when she'd just come out of the courtroom and just cried for most of the phone call, you know, because she'd bewildered as to why these new charges were coming.
The Iranian judiciary's website suggested the Foreign Secretary's comments shed new light on her case. It has meant 5 years in prison for plotting to overthrow the regime could be doubled to 10.
My remarks to
The Foreign Secretary had to call the Iranian Foreign Minister and was forced to clarify in the Commons.
The UK government has no doubt that she was on holiday in Iran when she was arrested last year, and that was the sole purpose of her visit. I accept that my remarks could have been clearer in that respect, and I'm glad to provide this clarification.
He faced calls to resign.
How about the Foreign Secretary himself shows a bit of personal responsibility and admits that a job like this, where your words hold gravity and your actions have consequences, it is simply not the job for him.
Eventually, after nearly an hour, there was a sort of apology.
I'm sorry if any words of mine have been so taken out of context and so misconstrued as to cause any kind of anxiety for the family of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
According to the Foreign Office, the Iranian Foreign Minister said today the fact Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe had been brought back to court wasn't due to Boris Johnson's comments, and he promised to work with the British government to try and resolve the case on humanitarian grounds. For her husband Richard, he can't get a visa to see his wife in prison or his daughter.
As Gabrielle's got older, she's understood more, so she now knows that her mum's in prison. She thinks that mummy and daddy are both in prison, and she said to her mum that she was praying to God for them both to be released.
He now wants the Foreign Secretary to visit his wife when he travels to Iran in the next few weeks. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
And our political correspondent Ben Wright is in Westminster. Ben, do you think Boris Johnson has done enough to satisfy his critics?
Well, George, as you've been hearing, Boris Johnson did have a real pummelling from MPs in the Commons this afternoon. MPs angry that this latest gaffe is on a different scale to previous fumbles by the Foreign Secretary. They were not impressed at the clear mismatch between what Mr Johnson claimed he said he meant last week with the words he actually delivered to that committee of MPs. They are angry that he didn't apologise unequivocally straight away this morning instead of having contrition drawn out of him by MPs, and they're angry that he hasn't yet met the husband of Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe, although the Foreign Secretary will meet him before he goes to Tehran before the end of the year. Now, Boris Johnson brushed off calls from Labour MPs to quit, saying the crucial thing is that his remarks hadn't jeopardised this case in Iran, and that's a view that was echoed by his Iranian counterpart. But this has been a very bad day for Boris Johnson, and I think if Theresa May was running a strong government with a united cabinet, she might be tempted to remove him over something like this, but it is a fragile government, and therefore Boris Johnson is riding this row out.
Ben, thank you very much.
Well, there is more trouble, meanwhile, for Theresa May, with mounting calls for 2 senior members of her cabinet to be sacked. The Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson was forced to defend to MPs his comments about the imprisonment of the British charity worker in Iran, even making an apology of sorts. The International Development Secretary, Priti Patel, was en route to Africa, so avoided tough questions about secret meetings with Israel. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks.
His time in office has been littered with gaffes, but this is a different level of trouble for the Foreign Secretary, accused of jeopardising the release from an Iranian jail of this British woman, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, by getting his facts wrong. Her family, hoping she'd be coming home soon, are distraught.
The Foreign Secretary mistakenly said that Nazanin was training journalists in Iran, and the consequence of that was that 2 days later Nazanin was taken to court, to the most severe of the Revolutionary Court judges, Judge Salabati, and the next day the judiciary put out a statement saying that there's more to what's going on than Nazanin just being there on holiday, and the UK has confirmed it, and they cited the Foreign Secretary's statement in Parliament as evidence of it.
With Mrs Zaghari-Ratcliffe separated from her young daughter and now facing the potential of a longer prison term, Boris Johnson met this barrage of criticism in the Commons.
What will it take before the Prime Minister says enough is enough.
He cannot be trusted to do this job, and he should resign.
Without admitting he'd made a mistake, the Foreign Secretary gave an apology of sorts.
Of course, I'm sorry if any words of mine have been so taken out of context and so misconstrued as to cause any kind of anxiety for the family of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Of course I am.
Even his own side has expressed surprise.
It shouldn't have happened, because this wasn't just a casual remark. He was actually giving evidence to the Select Committee on Foreign Affairs. He must have been provided with a brief. I'm sure he read the brief, but whether he read it properly in detail or skimmed through it, I don't know.
Also wavering dangerously off-brief, the International Development Secretary, Priti Patel, who set up secret meetings with the Israeli government whilst on holiday. It emerged today that the Prime Minister had been in the dark, that Ms Patel was considering giving aid money to the Israeli army.
This is a bad reflection on us as Palestinians, that she is not taking a stand against a cabinet minister that is supporting the Israeli occupation and the Israeli Defense Forces.
A glance round the cabinet and you get a very clear sense of what trouble this government is in. Boris Johnson and Priti Patel are the immediate worries for the Prime Minister, but she's already lost Michael Fallon as Defence Secretary. Her deputy Damien Green is still fighting accusations of inappropriate behaviour, and Commons leader Andrea Leadsom is under pressure over claims she failed to act. In ordinary times, you'd expect the Prime Minister to start a swift reshuffle, but these are anything but ordinary times.
You have to wonder just how bad it can possibly get for the Prime Minister. In the midst of difficult Brexit negotiations, Westminster beset by a sex scandal and unable even to rely on all of her cabinet. At the Tory party conference, the feeling was she'd managed to hang on until at least Brexit negotiations are over. Now there are some who doubt she'll even make it that far.
Romney Weeks at Westminster. Thank you.
Labour has demanded that Theresa May sack 2 of her cabinet ministers for serious foreign policy mistakes. They say the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson made a mistaken claim about a British-Iranian woman that has given the Iranian government an excuse to increase her jail sentence in Tehran. And International Development Secretary Priti Patel has admitted holding meetings with the Israeli government, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, without telling the Foreign Office or Downing Street beforehand. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has this.
Today, the pressure on Number 10 grew over gaffes by the 2 most senior cabinet ministers who handle foreign affairs. Theresa May faces calls even from her own side to sack both Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. The Foreign Secretary's in trouble over Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's serving a 5-year jail term in Iran. Her plight may have been made worse by what he told MPs last week.
When you look at what Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was doing, it's just, she was simply teaching people journalism, as I understand it.
But now Mr Johnson's making it clear Mrs Ratcliffe wasn't in fact teaching journalists. And having spoken to the Iranian Foreign Minister this morning, he said he was convinced that what he told MPs last week would have no bearing on her case.
The UK government has no doubt that she was on holiday in Iran when she was arrested last year, and that was the sole purpose of her visit. My point was that I disagreed with the Iranian view that training journalists was a crime.
This is the latest of a string of gaffes which Labour says have endangered our diplomatic relations.
What will it take before the Prime Minister says enough is enough? But if the truth is that she can't because she doesn't have the strength or authority to sack him, how about the Foreign Secretary himself shows a bit of personal responsibility and admits that a job like this, where your words hold gravity and your actions have consequences, it is simply not the job for him.
Will the Foreign Secretary now apologise?
Did he at least apologise?
And why not say sorry to the Ratcliffe family, several MPs asked.
Of course. I'm sorry if any words of mine have been so taken out of context and so misconstrued as to cause any kind of anxiety for the family of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Of course I am.
Development Secretary Priti Patel looks in even bigger trouble. but she's on a trip to Africa right now, so couldn't explain to MPs why she'd met the Israeli PM and other bigwigs while on holiday in Israel last August, without telling people in Whitehall. So it was left today to her deputy to reveal she'd not told the Foreign Office until after her meetings took place.
My right honourable friend informed the FCO on the 24th of August. I think, if I recall rightly, I think the FCO at that time sort of made the matter known both to her own department and to the rest of the FCO. So it was known at that stage. It would seem clear that discussions were not held in advance, and that is what my right honourable friend has apologised for and recognises she got wrong.
More astonishing, Mr Burt confirmed that having met the Israeli PM, Ms Patel urged her department to support an Israeli army programme on the Golan Heights which helps Syrian refugees. Whitehall blocked that, since Britain doesn't accept Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights.
Where she made a mistake, and she acknowledges this, is that if you are going as a Secretary of State meeting a foreign Prime Minister or government minister, it's not just the Foreign Office back home we need to know, it's the local ambassador should be involved. Hopefully should be sitting in on the meeting, so that if things are said, which are being recorded by the other side, there's somebody recording what you're saying as well.
MPs aren't happy about this strange episode, and the Speaker, John Bercow, told them they can question Priti Patel herself when she and the House return next week.
We'll leave it there for now.
Well, I think Priti Patel has got a lot more explaining to do if she's to survive this episode, both to the House itself and quite possibly the Select Committee on International Development, who'll decide next week whether they're going to hold an inquiry. And they, I think, will want to pursue the paper trail, the emails and text messages whereby the Conservative Friends of Israel group set up this meeting, this series of meetings for her in Israel. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson's reputation amongst many of his colleagues has fallen yet further. One senior Tory told us today, Boris Johnson is an effing disgrace, and if he had an ounce of integrity, which he doesn't, he'd have walked immediately.
Michael Crick. With me is Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband, Richard Ratcliffe. Richard, has the Foreign Secretary contacted you today?
No, I've not been in touch with him today. I've heard from Minister Burt, but not from the Foreign Secretary.
Has he ever contacted you?
No.
Have you ever contacted him?
I've tried to request to meet with him, but no, I've not. I've personally spoken to him on the phone.
What would you like him to do if you could speak to him?
Well, so what we were asking for at the beginning of the day was that he, retract in Parliament and make clear that Nazanin was on holiday and is innocent and is not training journalist and wasn't held for any reasons of the way in which the Iranians were using. He did that today, so that was a good thing.
And what about efforts to get her out?
Well, I mean, for a long time I've been complaining that the government needs to do more and needs to do more publicly. I was pleased last week that the Foreign Secretary talked about Nazanin's case. There were some inaccuracies in what he said, but I was pleased that he raised it. There's been an awful lot of sort of more attention to her case in the past couple of days, which, in my view, can only help. I think it's important that, the UK is really clear, and the Foreign Secretary is really clear to the Iranians, that it's unacceptable that, Nazanin's a British citizen, was there on holiday, being held on one set of charges that were trumped up and now a second set of charges being brought. And it's just crazy, and it needs to be clearly said that it's illegal and unacceptable.
Do you have a sense of exactly where she's being held, by whom, and do you believe the government understand the chain of command, if you like, in her being held? And if so, do you think they're in touch with that?
So, I mean, I know she's being held in the women's ward of the political prisoners. Who is blocking her release? Who is inventing this new set of charges? It's clearly coming from the Revolutionary Guard. Which bit, I don't know beyond that. In terms of who the government is talking to, they're very clear they're always talking to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's clear the Ministry of Foreign Affairs hasn't got a great grip of what's going on, because they were the ones who said only last week, we thought this won't be going to trial, and then it did.
Now, she's been held for 18 months. How's she coping?
Yeah, a long, long time. A long time sort of ups and downs and debilitating, and obviously 8 months in solitary confinement has caused all sorts of problems. she was really upset on Saturday when the new trial happened. I spent the day, well, an hour or whatever on the phone to her with her just crying the whole way through and just asking, you know, why me and what have I done and can't they see and what about my baby and what, you know, what can't they do? Not really with any clear, but just, you know, struggling to understand what's going on. She was calmer on Sunday. She saw Gabriella, you know, and was able to sort of do some drawing together. But yeah, it's taken a real toll on all of us, and the sooner that, you know, the weight of the government is brought to make this clear that this must be solved, the better.
Gabriella, your daughter, is no longer a baby. She's a child. How's she coping?
No, so that's right. She's 3 1/4. I mean, she's quite emotionally aware of what's going on. So at the visit on Sunday, she saw that Mum was upset. She saw that her granny was upset and was very quiet and you know, started cuddling them and asking why they were so quiet. She knows that you know, her mum is in prison and you know, says that she was praying to God that Mummy and Daddy both be released from prison so that she can go home. She also knows it's Christmas coming up, so she had a nice time drawing a reindeer picture with Nazanin and also writing a letter to Father Christmas that they were going to get Daddy to take and deliver. So she still focuses on the important things.
And after all this, would you like to meet with Boris Johnson?
Oh, yeah, like I think it would always be helpful. It's always good to have a face-to-face conversation. It's good for the acknowledgement that gives to the family, just as it's good for him to go to Iran and meet with Nazanin.
Richard Ratcliffe, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Matt.
Thanks, John. Well, Boris Johnson is just one leading politician who's hailed post-Brexit Britain as a power that can trade on its global past to occupy the global stage of the future without being shackled by a bothersome EU. That is the theory, the vision, the dream. But how does this tally with the shambles of Priti Patel's freelance tour of Israel or the Foreign Secretary's repeated gaffes? An indication of a foreign policy at sea or a government just out of control? Here's our international editor, Lindsay Hilson.
The face of British diplomacy, the Foreign and Development Secretaries at the UN General Assembly.
The terrorists did not win.
Listening to the leader who dare not sack them.
Destroy our way of life.
Whatever they say or do, at home or abroad. A high wire act is fine for the Mayor of London, but a Foreign Secretary's words matter. Boris said a former senior diplomat often makes things up as he goes along. But even he should know that if the continued incarceration of a British citizen is at stake, he must follow a brief carefully written by lawyers and diplomats.
I think the Iranian officials most definitely analyze and examine the Foreign Secretary's remarks. And in this case, hardliners in Iran are most definitely using Boris Johnson's remarks to fortify their case against Nazanin and will sort of play into the cases of others because they deeply believe that foreign governments, and in this case that of the UK, has a dark hand and a role in working against the Islamic Republic. And this is what is at the heart of Nazanin's case in Iran.
Johnson's was a sin of commission. Priti Patel's one of omission, failing to tell him or the Prime Minister about her holiday companions.
Please.
Oh my God, I'm sorry for this outfit. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Today, the 3 millionth tourist to visit Israel this year got a special treat. A surprise meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Development Secretary's encounter was not a surprise, at least not to her, as it was set up by an Israeli lobbyist. Priti Patel, seen here with the Indian Prime Minister, can holiday where she pleases. But former senior officials say they've never known a cabinet minister meet the head of a foreign government, let alone discuss controversial policy with no reference to diplomats. Britannia may no longer rule the waves, but such amateurishness has been noted, and the Foreign Secretary's demeanour is regarded as a reflection on a nation in decline and in disarray.
He tends to say the wrong thing. What is amusing is not necessarily diplomatic, so people don't take him that seriously. But people haven't, frankly, been worried too much about British foreign policy for quite some time, even under David Cameron. You know, after Libya, there was a pulling back of any really serious play in the world. I mean, Hague tried with women's rights and things like that, and that was good publicity with Angelina Jolie. But in terms of making a big difference, it's hard to find it there.
Looked at from Tehran, Tel Aviv, Brussels and beyond, it all speaks of a government and a country no longer in control of itself or its destiny.
Lindsay Hilson. Well, from South West London, I'm now joined by the Conservative MP Nadeem Zahawi, a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and a supporter of Boris Johnson in last year's leadership contest. Thanks for coming on the programme, Nadeem Zahawi. So let me start with you by reiterating the question at the top of this programme. Boris Johnson may have doubled the prison sentence of a mother in jail in Iran to 10 years because of his incompetence. What else does he need to do to get sacked?
Well, first of all, your whole programme has been assuming that the culprit in this is Boris Johnson. I disagree with that fundamentally. The culprit here is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Command. I think the whole of Parliament would agree on that. They are the people who are holding Nazanin and who are arbitrarily increasing her sentence.
Well, arbitrarily based on something that he said in the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I didn't just make this this wasn't just an aside. This was something that he said on the record in committee in the House of Commons, and he got it horribly wrong. And as a result of that, she may end up spending another 5 years in jail.
Well, well, first of all, as I said, Javad Zarif, his counterpart, who he spoke to today, made it very clear that that is not the case in the case of Nazanin. The Foreign Secretary came to Parliament today and explained what he said is to be the spurious allegations against Nazanin. She was on holiday in Iran, visiting family. She has a young child and a husband waiting for her. And all the effort should go into now getting her back to England. She's a British citizen. I asked him today in Parliament to redouble his efforts, and he has absolutely committed to redoubling that effort and visiting her in Iran. But he said that at the Foreign Affairs Committee as well, by the way, not just today.
No one is saying that the Iranian authorities are blameless in this, but when you talk about redoubling, he may have just redoubled her sentence. That's the issue here.
That is not true, and I don't believe that.
Not yet.
And actually, your whole emphasis on this is playing into the hands of the IRGC and Qasem Soleimani. They're loving this, where you're turning this into a sort of political football, wanting to attack Boris Johnson for this, when actually we should be focusing our efforts on putting the pressure on the Iranian regime to get Nazanin back home. She's a British citizen, she's a mother and a wife, and she must be the focus of our attention. This whole programme, I think, is completely misdirected, is probably an understatement.
Let's switch our focus then to Priti Patel. So she goes off to Israel, supposedly on holiday. She has 12 meetings, all with Israeli government officials, including the Prime Minister, not one of them with a Palestinian official. This is despite the fact that British foreign policy towards Israel has been incredibly carefully honed to be even-handed over decades. And then she does this, doesn't bother informing the embassy, doesn't inform the foreign secretary, doesn't inform the government, and then effectively lies about it.
Well, first of all, you say she's supposed to be on holiday. She was on holiday, and she paid for her holiday. Your piece just before this, which I was listening to very carefully by Lindsay Hilson, said she was with an Israeli lobbyist. Well, Lord Stuart Pollack is a British citizen and is a member of the House of Lords. So, again, you need a bit of balance in your reporting here, Christian. Priti has apologised because she did not, in advance, prepare for these meetings with the Foreign Office. The Foreign Office knew about the meetings in August. So this idea that she's doing something clandestine with some enemy state is completely spurious again. Israel's one of our greatest allies. It's important that we remember that and get some balance in this debate.
But she didn't inform the people that she should have informed. She was then dishonest about it, and she also offered British aid, precious British aid, to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, a body that gets billions of dollars in aid from the United States already. It doesn't need our money.
Hold on a second. She offered or wanted her department to look at offering aid to Syrian refugees on the Golan Heights. I hope you're not saying that we shouldn't be helping Syrian refugees. The department then came back with the Foreign Office advice that we don't recognise the occupied Golan Heights. And obviously then that was something that didn't go forward. So this idea that she was helping the Israeli Defense Forces. Again, you seem to want to twist everything to make it feel like she was doing something completely clandestine here. Listen, Priti Patel is a workaholic.
There's procedure
here. And
here.
again, you didn't add this. She met many charities, many startups who are working in Africa, in water purification, in making the deserts green, all sorts of things that are really she's passionate about, and you neglect to actually report them in your piece.
It is the Foreign Office, excuse me, it is the Foreign Office, her colleagues in her own party, who are horrified by Boris's gaffes and by the way that she's conducted her business here.
But you can't even name a single colleague. You say a senior MP in your report by Michael Crick just now. Nobody is saying that she didn't make a mistake. She herself has said she made a mistake, and she's put the record straight and actually put down every single meeting she had, including with many really important charities that do amazing work in the aid area.
Got to leave it there. Nadeem Zaghari, thank you very much.
And to the Daily Telegraph will start. May leaves Priti Patel's fate in the balance. It's been a torrid day, one might say.
It's been a torrid 3 months, 2 months. It's been a torrid week. It's been a torrid fortnight. This government, just when you think its sort of Keystone Cops aspect couldn't get more farcical, it seems to find another way of doing it. So we've had 2 senior politicians now affected the last couple of days. Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, who said that a teacher had gone to Iran on a holiday, was a teacher. She was teaching journalists. And when the Iranian government reacted to that, he said, I didn't say that. He did say that. It was recorded in Hansard as him saying that. It couldn't be clearer that he did say that. And instead of having the merest scintilla of decency to just hold his hand up and say, I made a mistake, he blustered and bloviated and sort of staggered around the place for weeks and weeks and weeks. And ended up now half apologising, but not really. But that's not even probably the worst of it. Which is worse, this Johnson or Patel?
No, I think Johnson. I think this has caused more damage because this Nanan Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband has said that he was very upset this morning at Liam Fox dismissing these remarks as a slip of the tongue. I mean, this is a slip of the tongue that could cost this lady 5 more years in jail. And although it's been said, over in Iran that this has made no difference to her sentence, it is no coincidence she was called back to court on November the 4th, and other things were put to her. Now, Johnson has now had to scrabble around and get his oppo in Iran to back him up and say that this has made no difference to this woman's sentence. I can't believe that. If they think that she was trying to overthrow Tehran, they're clearly out to get her. She took her child over there to meet her daughter, to meet her grandparents. So if they think she's trying to overthrow Tehran, well, obviously they're going to get her for whatever. So he's got a lot of sorting out. He's got to get his backside over there and sort this out, actually.
But maybe this will prompt him to do so. Maybe this will prompt the government to work even harder.
It shouldn't have even have come to this, because he was supposed to be going in a few months' time. Let's hope he's getting on a plane next week, because this lady's situation is incredibly serious. She has a child. She has a husband here. It's appalling. Yeah. The fact he just couldn't control.
And neither mother or father have seen that.
But also, I just slightly feel I'm taking crazy pills when he stands there and says, "I could have been clearer." And
yeah, well,
no,
said it.
You said it, and it's not just me thinking he said it.
And there was no evidence.
Hansard exists to say he said it. We know he said it.
And her husband said she's never taught journalists ever in her life. She's a charity worker. She doesn't teach.
And he used and so the other question about and
she works for the Thomson Reuters Foundation.
Yes, but the husband said she has never taught journalists.
And in any event, no one seems to she wasn't teaching journalists in Iran. Yes, and so he says. And this is his sort of defence, where if you're poking fun at this, you're saying this is a problem, you're deflecting the real criticism which should be waged against the Iranian government. And thankfully, we're all capable of keeping 2 separate thoughts in our heads. We can, on one level, just justify to ourselves the Iranian government is very often tyrannical and full of injustice. On the other hand, the British Foreign Secretary shouldn't make stupid remarks. If he has the misfortune of making a stupid remark, he should have the backbone to stand up and say it's done.
And what about Priti Patel? The Telegraph outlining that actually she took an earlier flight in order to avoid the Commons today, rather than the defence being that she was on this pre-arranged trip to Africa.
We've been talking about this out there and just thinking, I mean, it is the stupidest thing she could ever have done. I'm not, we've been talking about, is it a sacking offence? I mean, I know it's a bad thing to do. I don't know if it's a sacking offence.
Is any defence for her that she's a workaholic and she couldn't help herself? She was on a family holiday. She still had to crack on with her job. Any defence at all?
No.
Well, it's not a defence.
Why not?
But is it sackable? I mean...
Well, she went to see a foreign leader with no one present, and then came home and undertook to offer aid to an area which is not even recognised by Britain. And this is Israel.
But Syrian refugees.
Yes, her job is
in the Golan Heights.
Is offering aid.
Golan Heights, which is an illegal settlement, which Britain doesn't recognise. My point being...
So I get that. She got no permission from anybody, but is it really a sackable and such a bad offence when she was trying to actually do good?
Well, again, though, again, as with Boris Johnson, what happened when this first came out?
This is not as bad as
Did she say, I made a mistake, I should have consulted? No, she said to The Guardian the Foreign Office knew about it. Then she said, well, I told them about it while I was there, they didn't really know about it. And then she told Theresa May what had happened, but didn't say the thing about giving money to the Israeli army for Syrian refugees. So again, the question of judgment is absolutely critical here. If you make a mistake, own up to it, sort it out, and enable a situation to be handled. I imagine Theresa May and her advisors are going, what more as this shower of people I'm surrounding myself with, what more are they willing to do to topple this government? She can't fire anyone, it would seem, because if you voted for Brexit...
If you're a Brexiteer.
If you voted for Brexit and are in the Tory government, you've pretty much got carte blanche. They should just walk around shoplifting.
You haven't
nothing. They will never...
Here we go. You hear the word Brexit, you say the word Brexit, and boom, you're off on ridiculous.
But the point is, she can't fire Priti Patel very easily because she's worried about the Brexit balance. And she may still fire... I think she'll fire her in the next 24 hours.
If she was... Yeah, I mean, everybody's tweeting now, and various people are tweeting and saying she is going to get fired or resign in the next 24 hours. And although I think it's stupid, if she was power building and trying to, I don't know what was in her head when she was doing this. But and yes, it was very stupid and very, it was. And somebody said it was an act of insubordination. Even if it was that, I don't know if it's
or it's a workaholic, as some people have been saying.
Or it's a workaholic.
But it's a part of the world. Surely we can just accept this as a base level. It's a part of the world where you probably should act with advice and with consideration. You shouldn't be wandering off back from the beach, smearing suntan lotion off your face and going to meet Benjamin Netanyahu. It is fundamentally farcical. But again, it's the cover-up.
Do you think she went with the sun cream on?
Yeah, exactly. So hello, Benjamin. And then should we give aid to the Golan Heights?
OK, so that...
Golan Heights. I mean, this is an area of the world that is constantly fought over, where political issues are hugely significant. So to be dabbling in it on holiday, I think raises serious questions of...
Palestine's ambassador to the UK saying this evening that Ms Patel's actions were shocking and indeed contradicted the UK government's policy of supporting a two-state solution. How could a cabinet minister try to funnel funding for one side and pretend the other side is not existing?
See, that's when it starts to get serious, I guess. That's when you see...
And actually, what you both see with both of them, with both Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, they're actually operating in the world of global political consequences of their actions, and they are so absolutely lacking in awareness and self-awareness to realise.
But I have to say, I think what Johnson's done is so much worse. I really do. I mean, I think that what Johnson has done is stupidity on top of which he's piled danger for someone who's already in a lot of danger.
Yeah, but that's one person and not a whole regional... long-running, decades-long
Well, it's an interesting utilitarian argument to make about that. Which is worse, to harm one person directly or to harm lots of people theoretically?
Well, no, he's upset a lot of people. Sorry, she's upset a lot of people theoretically.
Let's go to those embattled cabinet ministers, if that's the right word, shall we? Inside the newspapers, Priti faces sack for Israel jaunt, with more news developing this evening on that.
Yeah, the first lesson is if Priti Patel wants to go on holiday with you, definitely say no, because it appears that you'd spend half your time traipsing in and out of various political institutions. And the problem with this is that there's various issues around this. One of the most notable ones is having made what seems to me to be a crazy error of judgment in going on holiday, not telling anyone, visiting various people, including the Israeli Prime Minister, which meant that when Theresa May, the Prime Minister, met him a couple of weeks ago, she didn't know that her own senior politician had met him herself just a couple of months ago. The problem is failing to deal with it openly, failing to say, here is what I did, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done it, telling all straight away to deal with the problem. Because you might say, this is just a symptom of someone who can't leave their work where it should be, and it's nothing more sinister than that. And if she'd said straight away...
Yes, workaholic minister is how another
but she was caught out by the
Conservative
BBC.
is described.
When she went to the Guardian, then asked her questions about it, and she said, oh yes, I was there with the full knowledge of the Foreign Office. That turned out not to be true. She only told the Foreign Office while she was out there. She was acting in such a way that if a Foreign Office official had done this, they would be accused of spying. She's effectively entering meetings without minutes, without authorisation, in an area of the world where tensions are automatically and persistently high. And someone in her senior position should have A, known better, but B, when she got into trouble, should have done something about it.
But our very own Andrew Pearce has written a piece about her, quite a crushing piece about her, saying that this was all about, although this was supposed to be a private holiday, this was her bid to raise her profile, because she really thinks she could be the next Prime Minister. Well, she's raised her profile, all right. And as Andrew points out, it's not like she actually was keeping the whole thing secret. She was actually tweeting photographs of herself the entire time. And you were mentioning the amount of ministers she met. 12 senior Israeli figures. And it turns out the news that's coming out tonight is that she actually met more than that. There were more and more meetings.
And she didn't tell Theresa May openly.
And the point of this is a woman who is actually not doing her job as International Development Secretary very well. She's already been criticised that, you know, the civil servants cannot spend the amount of money, the 0.7 of our budget. They can't spend it, and they're just wasting it. And she's been a terrible development secretary. And now this on top of that, so she's not likely to be Prime Minister anytime soon.
There is the Sun's take on this story by Tom Newton-Dunn, who is tweeting tonight that she's admitted to 2 more unauthorised meetings with senior Israeli officials since her return from Israel in August, while the front page of The Times, to be fair, down the bottom, says that she was accused of breaking a code by letting a lobbyist sit in on secret meetings with members of Israel's government, which seems to be the...
And meanwhile, she certainly then come back and says, why don't we give aid to the Israeli army in the Golan Heights? Well, the Golan Heights is an illegal settlement that is not recognised by Britain or pretty much anyone in the world, because it's illegal. They shouldn't be there. And although the money would be used to help Syrians, this notion that you can just sort of trample around this hugely tense area, what would the Palestinians feel about it? Well, you read that out previously. They're not very happy about a British government minister trampling around the place saying, why don't we support the Golan Heights? Well, we don't support what's going on in the Golan Heights because it's an illegal settlement on the part of the Israeli government, and our government believes
Yes, Palestine's ambassador to the UK saying that Ms Patel's actions were shocking, indeed contradicted the UK government's policy of supporting a two-state solution. How could a cabinet minister try to funnel funding for one side and pretend the other side is not existing? To be fair, the funding she was trying to channel was for Syrian refugees, which is the government's policy to keep refugees where they are.
If it turns out she's done all this to build her own power base, I mean, that's vanity in the extreme.
Well, the other
thing that
will do for her is that when she gets caught, she runs off early to her foreign trip to Uganda, so she's not even in.
So that's the Telegraph story, isn't it?
Yes,
she was due to take the 5:25 p.m. flight, instead left the country at 10:10 a.m. Meaning her deputy Alistair Burt had to field those angry questions, as the paper puts it.
Yeah, and how many Conservative MPs went to the Commons to show support? Historically, when a minister is facing a problem, what happens if they're popular, if they want to be supported? The government benches are packed by people who'll stand up, ask positive questions. There was very, very little evidence.
So were they there for Boris Johnson?
No.
There he is in the Commons. Being bashed, really, by...
He should be bashed. This makes me just categorically livid, this. Because, A, the consequences for an individual person, this poor woman who is in Iran, is now facing potentially 5 years extra in prison because he said at a select committee she was there teaching journalists. He may have made a slip. It may even be an understandable slip because he's got a lot of information that goes across his desk. But he categorically said she was there teaching journalists. He said it in terms. There is no confusion, there's no misspeaking. He said it categorically in terms. It was untrue. He was told it was untrue. He was told it had serious consequences. What would a reasonable, decent person do in that situation? They'd say, hands up, I screwed up, this is the situation. We are now 6
and what
or
did
7.
you say instead? I could have been more...
I could have been clearer, but I was effectively saying that even if she was doing that, maybe that's not really good enough reason to do anything about it. But he didn't say that. And it speaks so poorly of a person who wants to be considered a serious political figure in this country.
But, you know, the thing is, the whole thing isn't just about him either. It's about this lady who was in prison for 5 years. You know, she was facing prison. Yes, she's serving a 5-year sentence. And the thing is, the allegations against her that she was trying to topple the government in Tehran, which seems a bit far-fetched. But now this could add more years to her sentence. And even though Boris's counterpart in Iran is saying no, it's had no no effect on the fact she was brought back to court the other day with other charges. It clearly has, and it seems they're not taking it seriously. Liam Fox actually defended Boris by saying it was a slip of the tongue, you know? It's a slip of the tongue that could cost this lady another 5 years of her life. It's just, it is bumbling, you know? I mean, I know it gets called bumbling Boris, but really this is bumbling in the...
And even in the headline, it's a gaffe. Well, a gaffe is a
not
kind
a
of... A gaffe is a
funny
jolly, mistake. And I don't even want to be sort of mean-spirited. You know, of course people make mistakes. And, you know, it's very difficult to be across absolutely everything that is on your desk that involves...
But don't deny when you've done something.
Exactly.
It's very stupid.
But, you know, the second it was pointed out this could be a problem for a British citizen who could... You know, what is the role of the Foreign Office? Protecting British people abroad. As soon as it was pointed out that even this might be a problem...
But he's been on the phone, hasn't he?
But he needs to get
He's
over
had
it.
assurances that the statements he made to the select committee last week have not added to
they
the
would say
potential
admitted that they're
sentence.
wrong.
But also, he needs to go and see her. You know, she's out there. He needs to go and see her and actually try and...
It's not the easiest thing to get into Iran, is it?
Well, but he shouldn't have said what he said then, in which case...
No, but again, even if we just leave the specifics aside, he said something that was categorically untrue. We've all heard him say, you can see the Hansard evidence, but we now live in this slightly weird political world where you can just brazen it out and go, no, I didn't say that. He was like, no, you did say it.
But if he'd said sorry, would it almost have inflamed the situation more? Because why not?
Well, why would it?
Well, sorry wouldn't make this lady's husband feel any better, that's for sure.
But at least he would have been able to say categorically on the record straight away she wasn't teaching in...
Yeah, why did he even bring that up? I mean, there was no suggestion that she was teaching journalism. Why on earth did he say that? It's just ridiculous.
And I think the point about Boris is that I saw someone make the claim, you know, he's been famously, and he built a career as a journalist of doing this, of saying things that were a little bit on the edge of being untrue. Never wanting to row back. You know, he built a career in Brussels doing that. And the argument is...
The bendy bananas.
The bendy bananas. If you accept one thing categorically as untrue, then the next people, well, what about this thing he said? What about this thing he said? What about the 350 million quid? What about the bendy bananas? What about all the... And he can't, to save brand Boris, he can't concede fallibility. But to do that when there is the life of a woman in Iran at stake is callous to an extraordinary degree.